Hello and welcome to the Sustainability Experts, a podcast that brings you helpful advice on sustainable business. I'm your host, Vanessa Thompson, and in this episode, we're covering the water crisis with our incredible guest, Meena Sankaran. Sankaran is the CEO of KETOS, a company specializing in water intelligence solutions that leverage IoT and AI to provide real-time water quality monitoring and management. She is a seasoned entrepreneur and technologist with a passion for using innovative technologies to solve global water challenges with a background in engineering and leadership roles at companies like Cisco, Bank of America, and Big Switch Networks. Meena, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Vanessa, and thank you for having me over. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to start off with actually addressing our audience with talking a little bit of background on the water crisis in general, because a lot of our audience are business leaders who may be now starting to incorporate the aspects of sustainability into their business models, now realizing that that's important for the bottom line. But water quality is not really something that's spoken about a lot. So just to give our audience a little bit of background, on the Earth, we actually have a very limited amount of fresh water. And
Mhm.
we're using it up at a rate that's really too fast and not sustainable at all. And there's something called a day zero, which is actually where a city or a region might run out of water in that particular area. There's already areas that have reached their day zero where people are having to commute or potentially even move to new areas because they've run out of fresh water in that location. And just to give a quick list of cities that will be facing a day zero in the next few decades is London, Mexico City, Hong Kong, Bangalore, Melbourne, Jakarta, Sao Paulo, Tokyo, and Barcelona. All of these are examples of cities that are going to be facing a day zero. So every time you wake up in the morning and you turn on your faucet, or when you go down to your plant or operation and just water, you just pay a utility bill and water comes to you, understand that governments are actually working quite hard to get water to your location. And there's a lot of geopolitical issues behind it. And then there's also the issue of clean water as well, too, which is not necessarily just a regional issue, but here in the United States, it's also an issue as well. And I think that Americans have a lot of confidence that they think their water quality is very clean, and they just think, oh, maybe that's an issue in other countries. But the reality is that in the United States and everywhere in the world, there's issues with high pollutants in our water quality. Two-thirds of Americans are drinking water that have dangerous levels of PFAs in them and all of these kind of things. So that's just to give our audience a little bit of background as to why this is important and why it's important for business leaders to understand this, because you need to have clean, plentiful, fresh water for your business operations and for your homes. So all of that being said, Meena, I would love to ask you about, for you as an entrepreneur and technologist, why did water become interesting to you?
You touched on so many different points. Where am I going to even begin? I think a very critical point that you mentioned, Vanessa, is awareness. How many folks in their day-to-day lives, between being technologists or working for Intel and AMD
Yeah.
and the next big thing with NVIDIA and all of the different tech companies, or no matter what type of sector you're working in, how aware are you of water? I
Yeah.
mean, it's something that we tend to just take it for granted. And
Yeah.
I fall in the same boat when I was
Hmm.
practically being, employed more in the technology sector, working in data
Hmm.
center and other segments. I think the sense that we wake up in the morning, we open the tab, we just don't actually associate
Yeah.
a strong sense of urgency or awareness to water the way we do to other things. And what I mean by that is we're all wearing Fitbits, we're wearing all kinds of sensors all around our body when it comes to you measuring how many steps we take, what we do. I mean, everything is recorded, everything gets documented to the extent that we are trying to learn more and more about ourselves. But yet,
Hmm.
do we fully understand how much water we drink, or do we
Right.
understand even the quality of water in our own home,
Yeah.
or what's actually happening with water issues? I think the mindset traditionally has been, well, the utility is responsible for that, or a
Mhm.
city is responsible for that, and
Yeah.
to some extent there's also the sense of like it's a right, it's a
Mhm.
basic human right that we should have safe, clean drinking water, and they may not be far off on that. But then there's also the aspect of, well, then why is water so cheap in
Yeah.
terms of how it's getting priced, if it's expected to be at the caliber and the quality that everybody deserves to have? So there's lots of inequalities in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how water has been designed. And needless to say, in our 45 minutes or 50 minutes or whatever time we have today, we're not going
Mm-hmm.
to be able to kind of list out the myriad of issues that are happening with water, whether it's policy, whether it's pricing, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's a mix of people, because water is also not the most sexiest sector, Vanessa. People
Mm-hmm.
graduating from colleges are not thinking, man, I want to be a water engineer. Man, for like, they're not going to their mentors and going to school like,
Mm-hmm.
become a water resource engineer. That is not,
Yeah.
like, AI is on top of their list, but what
Right.
people are not thinking is, well, let me think about this. How can I incorporate AI into the water sector? Just like
Absolutely.
all the other sectors that are, really changing and having drastic transformations, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
transportation or whether it's even the power sector. We've seen what's happened with solar 20 years
Yeah.
ago, as well as 15 years ago, and then you've seen the shift in the last 7 years. So I think water will catch on, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
huge gap in the level of public awareness of what the water crisis is. And typically, one of the first things, Vanessa, when I said that I wanted to get into water, to most of the people that I've ever worked with, every single person, and I'm not kidding, I'm not exaggerating, every single person said, "Oh, so you're going to start a nonprofit?"
Yeah.
Because the immediate mindset is
Mm-hmm.
not about water is lucrative or water
Right.
is a critical component.
It's a necessity.
That exactly, they're not thinking about it from a standpoint of, is this a pivotal thing from a broader sustainability strategy? Or even
Mm-hmm.
talk to people in climate, everybody who's a climate expert, and all the folks deciding on all the next generations of what needs to happen with climate, and people talking about different shifts in climate, tend to heavily focus on carbon, right? And I'm
Yeah.
not saying that that needs to not happen, but I definitely believe that carbon has a stronger marketing team than the water team. And,
Yeah.
on a serious front, water marketing needs to step up
Yeah.
in terms of just being that strong voice. I think that I had a very, subtle relationship with water in a way that I never fully understood, but it was kind of like an undercurrent just
Right.
existed in my life. And as I pursued engineering, and just like the millions of other students here pursued careers into other tech companies, along the way something hit a nerve, Vanessa, where I felt like, why am I just improving technology with my skill to only make technology better? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm using tech to make tech better, but I'm not
Mm-hmm.
using tech towards applications that are laggard in sectors that
Yeah.
really need the dire support to move it forward. And
Mm-hmm.
it sort of felt for me personally where, how can I bring the nexus of food, air, and water in a way
Yeah.
that resonates for me? And water just felt like a really strong aspect of it, bringing it back to my roots. And
Yeah.
in a very short sense, I can just go about my why water story for an hour for you,
Yeah.
but through so many examples and stories. But I would say that's kind of a very summarized version of
Yeah.
connecting my roots to really me feeling, to build a movement which has a strong sense of purpose, but
Mm-hmm.
kind of connects my ikigai with my skill set, my passion, and wanting to leave the world a better place. And
Mm-hmm.
not just saying it in a very cliche manner, but truly in a way that, can I pay it forward? Can I make a difference in a way that potentially waterborne illnesses don't have to be, so reactive, but we can actually predict and prevent something in the future? And that's sort of like, I would say, the underlying current of everything that we're building.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that story with us. And I think that it's also, important to just even add on to that, that even just the aspect of awareness is one piece of it, but businesses also, I think, really need to be thinking about this too, not just, from the humanitarian side of things, but even just as business leaders, when we're seeing, sustainability, we're thinking about, just a year or two out, what is our strategy? And I think water is going to have to become a part of that strategy more and more, because all of our resources, whether that's clean air, whether that's clean water, all of these resources that are inputs to our businesses are not sustainable anymore. So we have to think about an entire strategy for around how are we going to sustain all of these inputs, which is why I think that this, conversation is so important. I think that your example of your business is a perfect case study of how this is actually helpful for the bottom line for all of your clients as well too, right? This is not just something that's good for the planet, that's good for the world as well too, but it's almost kind of, the metrics are hopefully pushing businesses to think about the kind of holistic economy and the holistic environment. But the reality is that what you're doing is actually directly implicating business value for your clients. So I think that's what's really great and also really inspiring about the technology that you are developing. And I'd love to get into that a little bit too, and tell our audience a little bit more about the technology at KETOS that you're looking at, and also kind of what the problem is with water quality testing in the United States. Why is it, inefficient today, and why is it really necessary to have real-time water monitoring?
Yeah, and basically, why do we exist? Why
Yeah.
do we exist? As I was assessing the problem there and did a lot of research with utilities, with industries, we quickly learned one, we needed to have sort of this 5 A's concept. It's the easiest way for me to explain to someone where, if somebody, well, why do you need to exist? It's like 5 A's. First is you need to have strong automated systems that work for agriculture, that work cross segments, industries, whether it's automotive sector, whether it's a bottling sector, whether it's a textile factory, whether it's a nuclear power plant, you need to have strong automated systems for water monitoring. So that's your first A, is automation. And when I say automation, Vanessa, I'm not just talking about, one stage of automation which some of these instruments have traditionally
Right.
had. I'm talking about automation all the way from sampling to AI. So everything from whatever stream you're monitoring, that gets automated. The sensing of that water gets automated, like what's in that water, the testing of it, the communication of all of that IoT back and forth, all of the data, the actual data processing, the analysis of that chemistry of that water composition, and then layering on AI and other ML models for predictions and insights based on what you've collected. That entire tech stack needed to be built. And so we realized that it had to be very cross-functional and interdisciplinary. So this is robotics. This is robotics meets data science meets material science with IoT and AI for the world of water. That's the best way to kind of describe a very interdisciplinary approach. So that's what it took to achieve the first A from an automation perspective. The second A is accuracy, because at the end of the day, everything is about accuracy. So if your data is not accurate, none of what you've built matters. So the accuracy was something critical, Vanessa. And when I'm talking accuracy, we're talking parts per billion. So we're talking 1 part per billion, 2 part per billion. So your specificity, your sensitivity of data, the precision of the data, all of that becomes very critical, because if you're asking operators to trust this data, then you need to deliver that level of accuracy and validation. So the A for accuracy became a very critical part. The third A is really about accessibility. You need to be able to have strong communication, strong encrypted data, so people can trust it, but also people can access it. So we realized, okay, everything has to be both mobile, on a desktop or a web browser, anywhere, but people also need to be able to access anywhere. Like a ranch manager walking in the middle of a specialty ag growing, almond field or raisins, or, middle of California, he's not going to be sitting in a very high-tech Google type of, environment. He's sitting and walking around thinking about, how much fertilizer am I going to blend and what nutrients am I going to mix for this almond growth?
Right.
That's who you're helping. So he needs to be able to have that decision criteria in a way that's easily accessible on his phone. So accessibility became a very critical part. And the fourth A is really about, can you make it affordable? Because at the end of the day, all of this stuff won't mean anything if it's not affordable. And all this instrumentation that was out there, Vanessa, was so expensive because people had to buy by parameter. And not to get too much into the weeds, but let's say you had a nitrates issue. And nitrates is one of the most common issue, which, even the EPA tracks, whether you're agriculture or industrial or even municipality. And nitrates is is a massive problem. Nitrates, nitrites, ammonia, orthophosphates, a wide variety of these things. And people had to buy individual instruments. So think about it. If
Hmm.
you were an operator and you had a chlorine issue or you had a nitrates issue, you had to go and buy, here's my chlorine analyzer, here's
Hmm.
my nitrate analyzer. Now I have to go and it so quickly becomes cross prohibitive that we're not helping solve the problem.
Yeah.
And so what I realized, it's not just innovation, it's the business model.
Yeah.
If we can't create a business model that actually follows the technology innovation, we're not helping accelerate that adoption because we're not helping them change processes in a way that actually alleviates some of the problems. So even if somebody who's very foresighted as an operator wanted to do the right thing, his hands were tied because he had limited budget and he just
Yeah.
couldn't do the right thing of wanting to monitor more. So we realized there had to be a behavioral change. And part of that behavioral change, Vanessa, was how can I make it affordable? So the first thing I decided, I'm not selling the equipment. I'm not going to sell the hardware. So if I took ownership as KETOS, and if KETOS took ownership and said, we're going to own the equipment, we're going to maintain the equipment for you, we're going to service the equipment for you, what does that do for that workforce? First thing, well, they're going to stop getting headaches. But second is they no longer have to think about repairs and warranty and,
Yeah.
is this a fail part and do I have to stock this up? Or wait a minute, is the shelf life of this equipment 3 years or 5 years or 2 years? What's happening?
Hmm.
Or how much should I use it? Because if I use it more, then do I have to purchase more consumables? Then I'm going to use it less so that I don't have to spend more on my consumables. So if I turned all these knobs off and I told them, you focus on getting the most optimal data with the highest frequency you need for your business. And I'm not going to penalize you based on how often you test, how many parameters you test, or even unlimited number of users on your system. I'm only going to focus on the streams of water. If you're monitoring this one stream of water and you have a system, I'm charging you by system, and I'm going to make it like a subscription fee, like Zoom or Teams or whatever per year.
Yeah.
How does that change behavior? First thing, they're like, well, wait a minute. I don't even need to go to my boss for approval. I can approve this because the
Hmm.
budget becomes really constrained. So I think allowing for business model changes, similar to how I mentioned earlier in our conversation about policy changes towards reporting, all of these have to go hand in hand with technological changes, Vanessa. Just technological innovations alone is not going to move the needle the way we want it to. And what I've noticed, I have not had to change the business model once since I founded the company. As much as people told me, oh, this is so different, this is not going to get adopted, you're going to get a lot of resistance. Guess what? You had the takers and you had the naysayers, and the people who had naysayers, they also came around. And when they said no, it was because of their own procurement practices, and they
Hmm.
had to just figure out a way around it. So, anyways, net, when you think about affordability and accuracy and accessibility and the autonomous nature of all of these, it really becomes crucial that you know the systems really operate from a sense of giving power to the operators in a way that they
Yeah.
get repurposed. It's not about taking their job away, but it's about repurposing. And believe it or not, by doing this, we are monitoring now 45 billion gallons of water globally.
Wow.
We have reduced over 2,400 metric tons of carbon, and this is just a
Wow.
scratch the surface. And we are able to bring, at least even in the toughest environments, about 40% labor efficiency. We have zero permit violations at any of the locations as soon as we get deployed, because they are able to have almost investigative compliance before the
Hmm.
compliance point. So,
Wow.
so they don't have to worry when is EPA going to come and
Right.
scram, because they already know that whenever EPA comes, they already have it clear and they can focus on their core operation. So you're looking at risk mitigation. So a CFO should care now, because it's no longer about millions of dollars and billions of dollars being spent on violations and PR nightmares. So CFO would care. So that's your risk mitigation. The COO would care because it's about P&L impact, because now you're
Hmm.
talking about labor efficiency and your labor retention and repurposing and doing more with less people. And third, the CEO would care about it because now you're operating as a sustainable company. So it improves how you're positioned in the market and how strategic you are. So there's no reason why any C-suite member should not be thinking about water as part of their top three pieces in strategy.
Absolutely. And that's really inspiring, I think, too, not only the impact, but how you set up the business model, I think, to really drive accessibility and hopefully, scale this for all, business operations to be having something like this so that they can be constantly monitoring their water quality. You kind of touched also a little bit on the technology itself, but I would love if you could also flesh that out a bit more for people who haven't, been involved with water quality monitoring before.
Sure.
In terms of, this is a device that actually sits at the plant itself and be constantly monitoring water quality. How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure check out our website, www.ketos.co. You're gonna see so the physicality of the system. And I think it's great that you bring that up because traditionally when you looked at large sort of IBM mainframes, okay, this is a good example for people who are not in the water sector. Those systems were large, Vanessa. Like I don't know if you've been and physically looked at it. I mean, it could be size of room, and they're also systems that have been used in the medical sector that are really large, like refrigerator size type of systems.
Hmm.
And then fast forward, when you think about IBM mainframe, then you look at VMware, what it did in the market. You have two RU servers, but the fundamental thing is you have one server solving and being able to work with about 1,000 applications or more, right?
Yeah.
And we have essentially done a bit of that into the water instrumentation world. And what I mean by that is large traditional $1 million equipment that existed in the labs. Now you have a system that is the size of a large microwave,
Wow.
right? So this system sits on a tabletop if you're indoor in a lab, or it can sit inside, a weatherized cabinet or NEMA cabinet outdoors. 40% of our deployments are outdoors.
Mm.
And in these deployments, you're sitting right at that stream. So whatever stream you want to
Wow.
monitor, whether you're monitoring at the source water, at the effluent, at discharge, or groundwater. We monitor a lot of groundwater wells because
Mm.
it's harder for people to get to. It's the middle of nowhere. People are
Yeah.
usually driving to and fro for collecting samples. So groundwater is a very easy one for people to test out and say, you know what, that's a perfect use case for me to see
Yeah.
value and show my organization within 90 days.
Mm.
So I think that's another way of thinking about it. But this is a system that physically sits in a, once we install it. And by the way, installation is not like, oh, I need a 30-day planning for this installation. We're talking about once we have the basic, just power, here's here's the water stream I want you to monitor, and looking at connectivity, we can basically come in and be in and out within a couple of days. And that's
Wow.
also basically because a lot of times you need security training, safety training in the first day you show up, but the installation itself is a day. And then
Wow.
the system is self-calibrating. This is another very critical
Mm.
part of it. You do not need to be an expert. You do not need to ramp up on new technology. We don't expect you to, become a scientist overnight and understand all the
Mhm.
nuances of chemistry. You can essentially have the system deployed and then be sitting in Florida and monitoring water in New Jersey,
Yeah.
right? So the critical part that we want to do is really build out a knock for you. So if
Mm.
you're a COO who has about 75 manufacturing plants all around the world, wherever you are, you have a knock and you have this global map on your platform that
Mm.
you can basically look at and say, that's what's happening in my 75 manufacturing plants. And you can have a sense of like my green, yellow, orange, red, and with a click of a button, which
Wow.
parameters are not doing so well, which ones are above the thresholds, and you set the thresholds. You decide
Mm.
what your thresholds are. And what I've seen with customers do is customers actually, like some of our meat processing plants, and those are some of the harshest water that they have to deal with, or even the produced
Yeah.
water guys with oil and gas. What they do is they set internal thresholds. So they never have to cross those internal thresholds. And then they have compliance thresholds that they never want to see.
Right.
So it's almost 2 to 3 degrees of thresholds, Vanessa, before they
Right.
even cross a violation, right? And
Yeah.
they're able to have a full map and a knock so they know exactly the quality of water that is going to their producing, like all the production streams. And when you look at really large, some of the top 3 chemical organizations in the world, you have so many production streams coming into a wastewater plant within a
Yeah.
facility. So having visibility of what's happening and catching them early on could save a company millions of dollars. So
Yeah.
this is, the ROI for this is a matter of days, weeks, months, depending on the size of your organization. You're not
Hmm.
talking about years of investment
Right.
to realize the value of what it's doing. And of course, the tertiary benefit, the social impact is massive, right?
Yeah.
So in essence, what people need to know is the AI models are built, the machine learning is built. So if I'm an ag customer, I'll give you a quick example of an
Hmm.
agriculture client. If you were, a few 100-acre farm and you have like 6 different wells, you're basically putting, let's say one system each of the well. You are able to work with us where we actually take in not only the water data from the well, we actually integrate the satellite data and do a heat map of your farm. And we're able to integrate the crop data, that whatever crop you're growing. And we can then, with our AI, actually give you optimum yield. So we can
Wow.
actually tell you which is leaning higher, which one's leaning lower. So doing those actionable insights, Vanessa, that's your
Hmm.
fifth day, is really, really making things actionable so that
Yeah.
it's not just about monitoring. There's so much monitoring
Hmm.
out there, but how can I make everything you invest in actionable so that
Yeah.
when a C-suite of any organization or any business leader or a GM of a plant is bombarded with data, because right now that's also another issue. People are bombarded with so much data, they don't even know what to do with the data.
Right.
So our goal is, how do we integrate with your existing systems? How do we integrate with your SCADA systems? How do we integrate with other third-party platforms that are out there? We are now
Yeah.
partnered with Accenture. We're now partnered with
Mhm.
Siemens. And so our goal is, how do we help you make your life better so that you can use really actionable data to
Yeah.
have meaningful decisions that drive a difference in the world, right? So I think also, to any technologist out there that's listening, it's important to not just think about what your value from a tech standpoint is. It's very
Hmm.
critical to think about, what is the value that's driving the business for your customer? What is your user's user going to think
Yeah.
about the technology that you're developing? And also the layers and the ripple effect of what you're developing. Because if you're not able to look at it from that holistic view, whatever you're developing is too short-sighted. It's
Yeah.
not for the level of sustainability that we all need to transpire
Yeah.
for, the change that we want to bring in.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something that's really apparent with your technology, particularly, is that the business value is so integrated into the actual, user interface and technology itself. You don't see that with a lot of other monitoring technologies where they're thinking about, how is this actually going to be utilized? How is this going to be actionable? How can I actually take actions based on this? And I think that's also why it can create such positive impact, not just for the business, but also for the planet as well, because people can take direct measures immediately after, seeing that information. So I think that's really beautiful. You mentioned some really interesting examples. Are there kind of any other really great examples? I know you've, worked with incredible clients, Fortune 500 companies. You've even worked with some energy providers, which I think is interesting, like nuclear and things like that too, in terms of monitoring their water quality as well. Are there any really interesting, case studies you can share with us of utilizing this technology?
Yeah, I mean, there are tons of them.
Mhm.
And I feel pretty blessed and grateful for so many of the organizations having an open mind to, like,
Mhm.
allow this. I think the key part of, I'll share one of the cities in New Mexico. They're quite a large city in New Mexico. And something that is incredible about what they're doing is they're so mindful about their water reuse, Vanessa. And most cities are not thinking about re-injecting water back into the aquifer.
Mhm.
But this city and their public works director is a phenomenal human being who, not only at a cutting edge for what the rest of the state and other cities' water rules might be, is trying to almost get to 90%, if not 100% water reuse, and
Wow.
is also pushing very hard in how he develops water back into reinjection into the aquifer, and all of it being monitored, right?
Mhm.
And so we have had a terrific journey with him in being able to really enhance his vision of what
Yeah.
he wants to accomplish. And I hope that, you know, I can't disclose too much, but I would say
Mhm.
that his name is Jim, and Jim is quite a common name. So, you know, for people out there, but Jim is phenomenal. And what he has accomplished is an example. It's exemplary for, you know, a lot of the city utilities out there. And
Mhm.
another example is also when people think about nuclear facilities, first thing they start cringing, and you
Mhm.
know they start wondering what kind of, you know,
Pollutants
output
and
comes out and
Mhm.
outcomes and influence. And but you know, we've had some very responsible energy clients where we're monitoring their holding ponds, we're monitoring
Mhm.
their holding ponds, and they're being quite proactive in, you know, everything that is being discharged, and how their violations are being addressed, or you
Mhm.
know, preventing violations from happening in the first
Yeah.
place, that you're not having phone calls about a city or, you know, a community looking at glowing water for
Yeah.
a wide variety of other reasons, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there are really strong good actors out there,
Mhm.
but there are also, I wouldn't say bad actors, but I would almost call them actors who are still, you know, choosing to have ignorance is bliss,
Yeah.
and not wanting to take that leap forward. And I would encourage all of them to realize that this is not a investment that is a cost line that they have to worry
Mhm.
about in their opex or worry about from their promotion. If anything, it's actually going to make them a stronger leader in their
Right.
organization. So another example besides the nuclear one, we have a lot of mining clients. We have a lot of industrial, I would say industrial and ag muni. If I were to almost split, we're trying to become more stronger in the muni, but our split right now is almost 50% industrial,
Mhm.
uh, 50 to almost 60% industrial, about 30% agriculture, so 25-30% ag,
Mhm.
and then about 15-20% in the municipality sector. So drinking water, wastewater. We do work with wastewater. We're in about 27 states in the US at the moment, but there's still so much work to do. And, you know, when I think about some of the other segments we really want to get into, just from a personal impact, I do want to get into the tribal areas where they are
Mhm.
struggling with not just water scarcity, because there's
Yeah.
so water usage and water availability is such a big problem for them before they can even think about water quality, right?
Mhm.
Also, a lot of the low income regions in the country where they're sort of, you know, neglected when you look at the water availability map and the water quality investments that are being made.
Mhm.
That's another region. And the third is also schools. Believe it or
Yeah.
not, there might be a lot of mixed percentile and data, but about roughly average 40% of schools still have lead toxicity in their drinking water. And
Wow.
that's a pretty steep number and something to
Yeah.
be concerned about, because most of the time kids are, you know, once somebody gets sick and substantial amount of things happen, then there's actually a change.
Right.
And what is sad is, you know, a lot of times when we reach out to a principal of a school, they're super excited. They want to do the right thing. They want the parents to have the visibility, and we can give complete
Mhm.
visibility to that. But then they would usually say, hey, let's talk to my facilities person. And as
Mhm.
soon as you talk to the facilities person there, they lean towards, oh, nothing's wrong. I'll just wait till something actually happens and we'll let you know. I don't think we
Mhm.
have anything to worry about. So
Mhm.
it's it's as business leaders, I think we also have a responsibility to find out who are the naysayers in the organizations that are blocking the actual substantial growth that the organization needs, even if it's a
Mhm.
school, even if it's a city, even if it's a company.
Mhm.
I have personally seen one city director, you know, call out a naysayer, and make that change happen. And I've never been more proud of her doing that, because, you know, it's easy to not want change, Vanessa. It's
Right.
the easiest thing to do is do nothing.
Mhm.
And, you know, there are lots of people who are in that boat. So I encourage people based on really strong examples of, you know, whether we have an amazing meat processing company that literally has zero violations. They're one of the top chicken poultry producers in the country.
Yeah.
Zero violations based on, you know, the streams we started monitoring for them. They monitor their ponds, they monitor their effluent, they monitor their pre and post treatment. And most importantly, as part of their processes, they're very responsible about even how often their boilers are running. Can they make a difference with the energy based on the water, quality of water being used? So there's so many different ways that you can actually embed the value and the ROI that they're phenomenal examples. On an average, all of our customers have gotten 400% increased visibility.
Wow.
That is an average. A typical mining client is able to roughly have almost 9 times more data testing in a day than
Wow.
what they did. So from a visibility standpoint, efficiency standpoint, and then being able to have that at your fingertips and not have to
Yeah.
worry about selective sampling or any of those,
Right.
that makes a huge difference in the SLA. So their SLA time is up, their plant uptime is up. So, you know, there are the direct things that we measure, but I feel like there's so many other metrics that, Vanessa, I don't even have
Yeah.
visibility to, that some customers may or may not share with us, that are
Hmm.
so more quantitative metrics that
Hmm.
are helping them indirectly through the value of it. Yeah, I could go on and on about examples, but I think that we've seen a very significant value shift of people who adopt versus people who don't. And a perfect example would be, we had a mining client just last week, who literally in one call had the stakeholders and said, "Yep, we've been waiting for something like this. Let's think about how we
Hmm.
start implementing it." And it was
Yeah.
one phone call. So
Wow.
you have those kind of adopters and leaders, and then you have those who are just going to resist it.
Yeah.
So it's finding more and more of those, and strengthening our case studies for just increased awareness. It all sort of comes back to awareness and
Yeah.
action at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's so particularly exciting about this technology, because you mentioned before too, there are those businesses that kind of choose to be ignorant and look the other way. But when you have a technology like this that's at your fingertips, where you can constantly gain internal transparency on yourself, there's almost no reason not to do that, in order
Right.
to be able to understand, at least for you to know what you're doing and who you're impacting, because that's a liability, right? You have to know that kind of thing. And as a business leader, when we have markets that are more and more competitive, information is incredibly powerful and important for business leaders to utilize. So I think that's something that's really, really exciting, particularly about this technology. And also, I wanted to spend a little bit of time too on talking about kind of business goals in this space too. And I think we touched on this as well too. But water positive is something that a lot of people talk about being water positive. But there's a lot of different ways, and I think with this technology, it almost kind of changes the narrative in terms of what we can think of, where should business leaders be at when they're thinking about water, what should their kind of vision be. So I kind of wanted to ask you about what you see your vision for KETOS being, in the future, but then also how you're hoping more businesses are kind of incorporating this to be more responsible with their water too.
I think it's very different for segment to segment. What I
Yeah.
mean by that is, if you look at the textile segment, right? I mean, the amount of water that's needed to make a pair of jeans, right?
Hmm.
Or, the amount of water that is actually discharged from some of these plants, or the bottling
Hmm.
plant. So it's a very different metric for water-driven industries versus the industries like automotive sector, where water is an ingredient, is part of the overall business, right? So I think for me, when I think about water positive, one is have water as a strong metric in your reporting, period. That is a
Hmm.
non-negotiable. Second, not just track water usage, but track water quality at the different stages of your entire process,
Hmm.
so that you have a strong visibility of the impact and the contamination and layers of your own quality of the product that is driven. Because that's
Hmm.
another thing, is when we've worked with indoor ag or any of the other agriculture or any of the products, CPG type of
Hmm.
scenario, we're directly impacting the quality of the product that is coming out, whether it's a
Hmm.
toothpaste, whether it's a soap,
Right.
because now water is a key ingredient. So we're impacting the quality of the water that is going into the
Yeah.
output of the product. So it's not about output of the water effluent discharge into the environment, but it's an actual product that you're using. So that's why I distinguished between the types of industries, right? So I think using better materials in your manufacturing process can be a big part for such heavy, large water user type of group that's actually going to move the needle forward. The second, for people who are being more conscious and responsible from a water ingredient, that would just be less chemicals, less fertilizers, less dosing. If there are opportunities for you to be more conscious of alternate ways of looking at how you're doing your chemical dosing, looking at how you're, implementing your fertilizers, that's all going to help in overall sustainability of your own trajectory of your planning, but also water indirectly and how you're getting to water positive. So I think there are ways to sort of like implement changes in your people, in your process, in your procedure, but it all starts from the top. It's what goals you are setting for yourself. And Vanessa, for me, as a KETOS visionary, for me, fundamentally, I want adoption. I really want to scale up adoption in a way that we can become even more economical to be able to enter a lot of the regions in Asia and Africa and Middle East, so that it's no longer just about Europe and Southern America, like Central America or Australia, New Zealand, and other countries. But I really want this to become a global movement, because in just a matter of a few whatever thousand systems, or we've barely scratched the surface, and we've already generated close to 300 million data insights that are proprietary data insights, right? So to me, that is high quality data that we have generated for our clients. And so imagine if I can get to really scale up growth and scale up volume, then what is the power of that data and the types of data that we would have at that point? Potentially, today we can already see, one of the new products we're going to be launching is Prism. We already have a mapping of PFAS across the entire United States, just as a heat map, so people can at least start having a first step as visibility, right? So then the next step is going to be, how do I get into other contaminants? How do I really start helping people potentially map zip code and health issues? We already have an internal platform where we start tracking by zip code health implications based on lead and arsenic. Arsenic can, cause kidney diseases, and being contacted by nonprofits where we worked on initiatives that are more from a circular economy perspective for regions where groundwater is just generally very toxic in northeast part of India. So, there's also projects where we work on lake restorations, where like in Mexico or other, where, water from Aztec eras is now so polluted that all the agricultural areas are impacted. So to me, when I look at business goals, it's really about what are the types of initiatives that really put community first, public health first. So that's a very important part of the trajectory of the company. But in parallel, how do I help industries and agriculture sectors and just farmers overall in being able to deliver safer food quality for us in the market, while helping restore our lakes and rivers and environments in a way that is really harmonious to what is left for our future generations in terms of any fresh water left, right? So I think my business goals transcend more from a standpoint of, what do we leave behind as a legacy, and what is going to help us get there, and what are the modes and avenues for us to reach that, where you have lucrative customers, but you also have very socially driven customers.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you for joining us on this episode.
Thank you, Vanessa. Really appreciate the opportunity. And hopefully you're inspiring a lot of the next generation of people wanting to join water. I don't know if I got through this, but I'm hoping that we tend to have a lot of interns, and I'm always trying to encourage them to think about water from, life sciences, R&D, chemistry, physics, material science, data science, AI. So they don't think about water just from a very traditional plumbing sense. And there's a lot of exciting technology to be thought about. So hopefully we can encourage a lot of the next generation of youth as well.
Absolutely. And oh, one more question I forgot to ask too, which is where can people find you and where can people learn more about your work as well as KETOS?
Oh, absolutely. Just go to our website. Yeah, you will see a lot of materials on the customers, use cases, and other things. But feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I'd be happy to, connect with you, answer questions, and learn more about what you're doing.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sustainability Experts. If you liked the insights from our podcast, feel free to reach out to us on our website. We produce episodes with world-class executives every month and offer exclusive consulting and speaking services globally. Reach out to us and become a leader in your industry.